Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place for all things public information related for police, fire, EMS, and local government. An open forum to learn, grow, and develop your public information skills. Your host, Robert Tornabene, is a public information officer with over 10 years in the field and 27 years of law enforcement background. In each episode, we will explore different aspects of the public information officer profession. Weekly, we will delve into the field of public information by talking to other PIOs. So sit back and enjoy this episode.
Before we start with today's guest, I wanted to talk about the National Information Officers Association conference that took place last week in Clearwater, Tampa. If you haven't been able to attend a conference yet, I suggest you plan on attending one in the future. This year's conference had some amazing speakers and topics. Some of that was contributed to what occurred in 2020 and the impact of the pandemic, but also this year's speaker pool was amazing. Some of the topics included storytelling workshops put on by Michelle Guido and John Busdecker from the Orange County Sheriff's Office, a photography workshop done by the husband and wife team, Christopher Cook from Arlington PD and Savoni Cook from Mansfield PD. The great Judy Pell from 10A Communications did a session on advanced social media. They had video tips from former members of the media by Daryl Dabusk from the FBI. They had the Christmas Day Nashville bombing by Metro Nashville PD members Jason Pack and the FBI, and auxiliary PIOs by Jake Smith from Gwinnett County PD. Other topics included clouding the counter-narrative and malicious actors by Judy Pell of 10A Communications, PIO Resilience by Jeff Thompson, which I think is an important topic to talk about, Handling Multiple Incidents in Louisiana by the Calaichou Parish Sheriff's Office Chief Deputy Stitch Galori and PIO Kayla Vincent. I think I butchered the parish's name. When Social Media Works Against You by Josh Devine and Leslie Earhart from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, The Insurrection of the U.S. Capitol by Dustin Sternbeck and his colleagues from the U.S. Capitol Metro, or actually from the Metro Police. Finally, a recap of the George Floyd incident involving the Minneapolis Police, and the Director of Police Information, John Elder, will cover that. We will work to get some of these great speakers on the show in the coming months. Now, without any further delay, let's meet today's speaker. Good morning. Today on the PIO podcast, on episode 35, we have Jeremy Warnick. He's the Director of Communications for the Cambridge Police Department. Jeremy, thank you for coming on the show.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Robert.
Jeremy, you have been a suggestion for quite a while to get on the show, so I'm really pleased that you agree to do this. I want to talk a little bit about your communications background before we dive into the meat and potatoes of the interview.
Yeah, so I know with the other guests that you've had, a lot of them are former reporters or in some cases former police officers. And my background's a little bit more unique and probably in the minority in terms of other PIOs around the country. So I come from a public relations background. My focus in college was advertising and public relations, and my dream was to be a sports broadcaster coming out of college. So I got pretty close to that dream being on radio and TV in college and doing sports, and then actually ended up landing my first job out of college at ESPN and worked there for 3.5 years in their public relations department. So I was one of 35 PR folks in the department working for Disney and Mickey Mouse, and loved it. It was a fantastic job, and really to do PR, do sports, it was a dream come true. But the reality was I was scraping my way just to climb up to from 35 to 34 to 33, because once people get there, they don't leave. And then my passions took me other places. I wanted to go back home. I'm originally from Massachusetts, so I moved back from Connecticut to Massachusetts and jumped around a little bit and landed at LoJack. And LoJack, for people that don't know, is a stolen vehicle recovery system that essentially has put itself out of business in the United States. And I was working with PIOs all over the country to introduce them to the product and then essentially help them market and publicize auto theft and auto theft recovery through our system. So I get to work with some great PIOs around the country, some sheriff's office. It's where I met people like Kevin Macchioli here in Middlesex County, Massachusetts. He launched a safety net product that we had that was to help find people that went missing. So I'm doing the PR end on the corporate side, working with PIOs, and really started to enjoy it. And as the business started to have its struggles, I saw that Cambridge Police had an opening and they were looking for a new director of communications. So I found it through LinkedIn, didn't know anyone in Cambridge, really had no experience and passed with Cambridge at all, aside from being close to the area. Applied for it and was fortunate to get it. And I've been here for 7.5 years.
Nice. Well, it's a different perspective of coming into the field compared to what the average is. Is the position, are there more than one person that works in your office besides yourself?
Yeah, so in the public information office, it is just me. So I'm essentially a one-person shop with a lot of support, obviously, from our leadership team and command staff. I report directly to our police commissioner, and who is essentially de facto chief. We have our commissioner could be a civilian or a sworn. In the case right now, it's a sworn police commissioner. But yeah, I report right to the top, and that certainly helps in terms of my role. And for those that don't report to their chief or commissioner, I can't imagine the challenges associated with that, but that certainly eases things. But I am a one-person shop, so I exclusively handle our social media, exclusively handle our website management. I'm the main contact for media. And so it's an active role. We aren't Boston. We're right across the river from Boston. Charles River is the divider, and we don't nearly have anywhere the level of crime that Boston has, but we have MIT, we have Harvard, we have a fairly liberal resident base. So it's an active community. And when we have a shooting, a stabbing, a homicide, it's a big deal. We automatically go into community meeting mode for any one of those events. And we do it quite frequently to try to increase that transparency and be available for our residents. But yeah, when we have a couple of shootings, we're right now in somewhat of a crisis in terms of shootings. We've had 5 since July 15th. And some residents are claiming that this is like Chicago. It's like, so
They have no clue.
Sense,
Yeah, they have no clue what's going on.
That to give you a sense, yeah. So it's a hands-on approach whenever we have any critical incidents.
How big is Cambridge Police Department as in sworn personnel?
Yeah, so we have 280 sworn and about 40 non-sworn. So it's a roughly 320 overall.
Okay, so a fairly a medium-sized agency in the grand scheme. And what's the population of Cambridge?
So daytime population, more so pre-COVID, it could be anywhere 200,000 to 300,000. But nighttime, it's roughly 110 to 120,000.
Mostly because of the colleges and the businesses.
Yeah, so you have those students, and we're a big tech area. So Kendall Square is essentially the Silicon Valley of the Northeast.
Google's got a campus there, correct?
So Google has a campus, Facebook has a campus, Microsoft, IBM.
Oh, wow.
It's very, very active. Moderna and Pfizer both have campuses here. So obviously during the pandemic, we've been on the radar of a lot of different media because of that.
Okay. So you wrote an article for Police Chief Magazine, Forging Relationships with Local Media. And part of that was by staying, in the article you wrote, by staying connected and regularly sharing information with reporters, especially in breaking news situations, that it receives broad interest at the local and perhaps national level. And it said a law enforcement agency will build a strong relationship with reporters. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so one of my first priorities when I started here in Cambridge Police was to build a connection with our local editor of the Cambridge Chronicle. And the Chronicle is a gatehouse media outlet. It is the oldest running weekly print publication in the country. And it's essentially a one-person shop as well. And they are the ones that have really invested the most in terms of getting to know the department and looking for updates, and essentially getting to the point where, because it's a one-person operation, requesting us to submit articles, submit materials, and they'll run it. So I wanted to really make sure that we had a strong relationship with the Chronicle and the editor and any freelancers that she may hire. So I made a point for that and really continue to build that. And I've been fortunate she's still in the role that she is 7.5 years later in the time that I've been here. But it expands beyond that, so, the news media right now, it's so competitive. There's 5 local television stations here in Boston, and some would argue that that's 3 too many. However, because they're all competing against each other. Some of them are on from 4:30 in the morning till 11 in the morning live. And if there's a big enough story here in Cambridge or anywhere, the likelihood is that reporter is going to be on scene through the course of the morning, and they don't want to be repeating the same story over and over again. And what I found to be so important in terms of building the relationships is just constantly feeding them just even little information. So someone's released from a hospital, the condition of the street closures have been lifted, that type of information that gives them a new angle to work with. So when they provide that new update, they have the basis of their story, but then they have something new to add. And that's really gone a long way. And talking to reporters, they don't get enough of that from other PIOs. They want that from everybody as much as possible. And it's not a big ask. And the reality is it's just a matter of staying in touch and working closely with them in the midst of it. And then when there isn't a breaking situation, what does that relationship look like? Are we only reaching out with pitches with good news, or are we just doing general check-ins? And the reality is a lot of our best stories that we've had covered about the Cambridge Police Department has resulted from just general conversation, general meetings, coffee meetings, lunch meetings, text exchanges. Hey, what's going on? It's a slow news day today. What do you guys got going on? And I'll give them 4 or 5 different story ideas. And the reality is they usually pick up one of those, if not right away, within the week. And it just shows the value of having that type of relationship. I mean, relationships in media is somewhat cliche, but what's not cliche is how you build those relationships and what does that actually look like. And again, I don't think it's a big ask in terms of what we could be doing with our local reporters in terms of developing that. Where it becomes a challenge is the turnover and staying on top of that. But even with turnover, there's some mainstays within each of these stations, within some of these big outlets that we all work with. And if you have a good relationship with them, the likelihood is they're going to refer you to the new freelancers, and you're going to get off to a good start right away with those new reporters.
There's a reporter or a former reporter from the Chicagoland area. His name's Rick Rosenthal. He does media training. He started doing media training with law enforcement, like pre-FBI, LIDA, and all that other stuff. And one of the things he called that whole thing about dealing with reporters, about giving them that little information, is called feeding the animals.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about just giving them the tidbits that they needed so that they didn't go looking for other things or to look at the agency and say, you're not giving me something, so what are you hiding? And that he was all about transparency. And coming from the reporter's perspective, I can see that. There's also the agency side perspective where you're trying to control your message, but also paint your agency in the best light as possible. But we can't just always count on that to be a happy time anymore, can we?
Was, when I started 7.5 years ago, I thought to provide information to the media, they wanted that refined, full summary and every single detail captured. And the reality is, what's better from what I've heard in terms of our local media is they just want little bits of information, as much as we can provide in near real time throughout the course of an incident. And the same goes for residents. We've found that to be much more effective than waiting 6 to 8 hours with the full details versus, again, providing little bits of information over the course of an incident, and then at the end, fully providing that summary. There's no reason you can't do both. And if we're not providing that information, and you've heard this in other podcasts that you've done, it's being filled by others, whether it be others in the community, other reporters, some that have solid reputations, others that no one has any sense of. And we're fighting a battle of disinformation, misinformation on a regular basis if we're not out front with these incidents.
How many platforms are you running? Social media platforms do you run to put information out?
Yeah, so the Cambridge Police, my predecessor, started our Twitter feed back in June of 2010. So we were one of the earlier adopters as an agency with Twitter. And that's still our bread and butter in terms of providing breaking news and being active and having engagement with residents. They have almost become accustomed to going there first. And as a result of that conditioning, we try to put information there first. So that is definitely our bread and butter. But we're active on Facebook, we're active on Instagram. And now Instagram is essentially 4 different platforms between stories, the news feeds, IGTV. Reels. So we're active on all of those to some extent. We're on YouTube, we're on Nextdoor. We also utilize Tip 411 for our alert notifications and getting those tip notifications, anonymous tip notifications. So those are all under my supervision, and really when we have a critical incident, I'm trying to tap into those appropriately and as much as possible.
Okay, so you definitely are handling a lot then. If you're producing all that content, and then at the same time you're dealing with the Tip 411 stuff coming in during an incident. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, there's high volume, and really what we've tried to do is, so all of our detectives and supervisors, as well as our leadership team, they all have access to the tips. So that's not incumbent on me to necessarily handle and respond to. And it's also managed 24/7 by our emergency communications center. So they're tapped into that. But Nextdoor, and then all these different private messages that come through from Instagram and Facebook, et cetera, those are ones that I'm handling and then directing off. And it's one of the reasons why a platform like Meltwater Engage that we have, to put a plug in there, has been really helpful for a one-person shop like mine, in that I can have everything funneled into one source. So I don't have to go into each of those native applications and constantly keep an eye on things. I can look in one place, respond in one place. And if it's not even necessarily relevant to our department, I'm assigning tasks to different departments in the city, because we're using it across the city. So DPW, City Hall, even the library is using it to some capacity. So it's nice and easy to be able to manage some of these inbound requests and inquiries that we receive on a regular basis.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's the Meltwater platform that you're using for that.
Yeah, it started out as Sprout Social, and then they ended up getting acquired by Meltwater.
Okay, great, awesome. That's it's a heck of a lot better than trying to jump from platform to platform.
Yeah, and there's benefits to posting on each of the platforms versus using a Meltwater Engage for posting. But again, more from the management side, the monitoring side, I've been a huge advocate of having that one-stop shop where you can much more easily manage it.
Yeah, I know the algorithms that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram all really push towards native posting, but you can't always do it, and especially in a crisis, it's too hard to try and jump from platform to platform. So, with the reporters that you have interacted with, particularly you said the one editor from the newspaper there, and by the way, local newspapers, sometimes they dig up some of the most interesting stuff before the TV news, and for municipalities that are smaller, TV news is not necessarily going to pay that much attention to them. So the fact that you're able to go ahead and produce stories or make a pitch to them, or they come to you looking for a pitch, is outstanding. How has that tight relationship? How is that? Has there been negatives from being that connected to them in any way, sense of?
So with that particular editor, no, it's actually been hugely beneficial. And I'm fortunate that there hasn't been turnover in that position, because I think it may be different, but we really do have a quality relationship. We talked yesterday at length about a series of incidents that have occurred in the city. And she's someone that I'm very comfortable and confident I can go on and off record with. So if she's looking for background and information, or if I wanted to try to guide her in a certain direction, and in a transparent way, she's understanding why I'm going off record. And we've gotten to that point. There's other kind of local bloggers, if you will, where I won't even talk to them on the phone because I know they're going to try to misconstrue something. So everything I do with them is in writing, and it's the only way I can trust it. And when they go back and they print something in a story on their blog post or whatever, I can go back and say, listen, no, I didn't say this. Copy and paste. You see it in this email. I said this. So there is definitely, some give and take in terms of some of the others, but the one that we've invested the most in, the one that we know is going to spend the most time trying to understand the specifics of the department and crime in the city, is the one that we've given the most time to and the most resources to.
Sounds great. I mean, that is. I have gone off the record with reporters, with a few reporters, one particular in print, many times in the past, because I've built a relationship with that person over a 10-year period. The advantage to that, like you said, was that he knew if I said, hey, can we go off the record? I also knew that I wasn't going to get bitten in the butt later on because I said something to give him context to the story so they can understand it better. Um, have you seen some of the bite to get things quickly, especially from the TV stations? Like you said, they're running 4:30 to 11 a.m. full news story news programs. Are you seeing them that bite to get something first and quick sometimes leads to a lot of misinformation or a lack of proper information going out to the public?
I think it's partly because we're one of the largest media markets in the country, and there's a strong desire to ultimately land in Boston if you're a reporter, no matter where you are in the country. And the same, I'm sure, goes for Chicago. But so as a result of that, there is a strong sense of pride with especially these veteran reporters. They're not going to go out with a lot of speculation initially, for the most part. We have had some struggles with some of the newer reporters who are more willing to do that, and they'll literally grab anyone off the street and try to get some sound bites. It's like you're talking to someone who potentially is going through some sort of substance abuse disorder. Like that's your source. But
Right.
for the most part, they're really tempered in terms of the type of information that they're releasing and when they're releasing it, especially when they know that they're going to be getting follow-up information from someone like us shortly. And because of that, they're willing to be a little bit more patient. And granted, there's a certain amount of time that can only lapse before they're going to start to look elsewhere. But for the most part, I think we've developed a good enough relationship where they're willing to be patient, especially if they know that more information is coming.
Right. All right. So let's change gears here a little bit. So you wrote another article for Police Chief Magazine about an investing in your story, and this is particularly about recruitment for law enforcement agencies, and this is an area that everybody is struggling in right now. And as a PIO and a comms director, we're that we create that image for the department to go and bring in those new people. We're all struggling to do this. So let's talk about the job as a PIO or a communications person to recruitment and what they need to do.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. So it's become one of my biggest passions here is working in tandem with our personnel department to help with recruiting. So we only have one chance every 2 years to recruit, really. I mean, it's recruiting is ongoing all the time, but our test here in Massachusetts through civil service is once every 2 years. So, and we are restricted in terms of our candidates have to be living in Cambridge for a year prior to the test.
Oh
So
wow.
we have a lot of limitations and really have to be really focused in terms of our recruiting. And I paid a lot of attention. So when I initially started here 7.5 years ago, the recruiting was done purely out of City Hall and the personnel office. And they would just post a link to the employment page. Clearly not enough. We didn't have any flyers, we didn't have any video content, we didn't have a web page, we had nothing. So I've slowly tried to build it up over the course of the time and gotten to a point now where I feel like we're best equipped than we ever have been. But I looked at other agencies even recently that would take a template approach and simply just insert their name, and it was the same message across the board. And in a situation like ours, we're not only competing against other agencies in the area, we're competing against these big tech companies and biotech companies that can offer people out of college jobs that are paying 80, 90, $100,000 plus, great benefits, 9 to 5. Whereas here, you're going to be waiting an extended time to get into the department, into the academy, and that's if you pass the academy. And then you're likely working night shift and, and you're
Yeah.
working holidays. So there's an uphill challenge. And so I've really put a lot of time into looking at other departments and who is doing it well, and not just agencies and law enforcement, but also looking at other corporations around the country and how they're recruiting. Because the reality is right now, the unemployment rates are high. People are getting great benefits from the government because of the pandemic. And there's a lot of issues with people hiring right now. They just cannot get these jobs.
Right.
They can't give them away. And we're part of that. The reality is we're struggling to fill the numbers. And from a law enforcement perspective, one of the videos that I saw that really struck me was done by Grand Junction, Colorado, and Chief Schumacher.
Schumacher, yeah,
That
Dave Schumacher. Yeah, he'll be on coming up soon.
he is fantastic, and he really took look at it in a completely different way and told it from a story and told it really about the philosophy and the goals and the vision of the department, and really what separates them from not just other police departments, but any organization across the board. And it really was inspirational in terms of that story. And that was the impetus to develop our own set. We ended up doing a 3-part video series and one that was captioned in Spanish that really told our story. What makes us different? The fact that we commit a lot of investment in resources towards helping our most vulnerable populations in our city. Maybe every police department's not like that. A lot of organizations not like that, but we're doing it. The selflessness of our officers and these different characteristics of our officers that we're looking for in people, and did a lot of research and got to that point and really got good feedback, not just from our officers, but from community members, and found a couple of really amazing freelancers that had done documentary style storytelling that I wanted to apply here. And that really helped in terms of the investment of our story and getting the word out to reach, our targeted audience that we're limited to in terms of who we can reach because of civil service.
So what do you think is besides the local issue that you have with having to live in Cambridge a year prior to going through the process? What do you think is one of the greatest challenges right now for law enforcement in getting recruits? Even though I understand the economy is an issue and they're getting more money from the government on a just sitting at home in some cases. What do you think is another impact that's really hit law enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the national narrative is affecting local narrative, no matter where you are in the country. And so that's something that we have to acknowledge. And that's something that we did address in our latest recruiting campaign, and that, we know that the spotlight is on us to be better. And we're going to meet that challenge head on. And we're going to do everything we possibly can to address it and improve in terms of everything from policy to action, basic action. So that's one thing we felt like we could not ignore. The national narrative is having an impact everywhere, and how are we addressing it as a department? So if someone is looking to join our department, or is even just sniffing around at the idea of potentially working for the Cambridge Police, what is their stance on that? What is their stance on the George Floyd murder? What is their stance on, duty to intervene, anything along those lines? We felt like we had to address that if we wanted to be realistic in terms of recruiting the best candidates.
So as you go through your recruiting, and then also as you do your daily branding of the agency, you're obviously talking about the mission and the vision, or trying to define the mission and the vision of the Cambridge Police Department to the public. How are you going about doing that in it? Just not even from a recruitment sense, but just putting that what transparency you want to have out to the community.
Yeah, it was really going back to being very intentional about every single post, especially as we got closer to the deadline for the test, to register for the test. So being extremely intentional about every single post that we put out there, because that one post that they see could be the difference between them convinced to apply or not apply. And so that's a lot of weight, but I treated that very seriously, and it provided a really good opportunity as well to kind of raise and bring things to the surface that we may have taken for granted as a city and as a department, in terms of some of the programs that we do, that we think we do really well, that have been nationally recognized. What a great opportunity to elevate those again, even though, there may be an assumption that it's fairly well known locally. Well, that's an assumption. We don't know for sure. So why not just bring that back to the forefront? So we did a lot of that, but again, I think it really went back to intentionality in terms of, what we featured, who we featured, and listening and being attentive to, any follow-up questions or engagement opportunities that came out of that.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think people sometimes think that we put a release out about we won an award, we're doing these great programs. We put it out once, and then we think that the public knows. And we have to constantly remind them of that. And we can have transparency dashboards where it shows all the statistics, but the general public, they don't want to go look at that, do they? No. They want to be spoon-fed.
They do. And I think we have to remind ourselves sometimes that, just because we put something out doesn't mean we can't put it out again. The fact that, especially, in a situation like us where we have 5 or 6 different platforms to work with, You don't have to just put them all out at one message out at one time across 6 platforms at one time, but again, strategically time and place where these go, and mix and vary the messaging, and mix and vary the images and the multimedia associated with it. Some might warrant a video, some might warrant just a simple text post, some might warrant an infographic, but depending on what you have, there's different ways to maximize it and create some lifespan with some of these messages.
In your recruitment video, did you use did you guys produce it, or was it done? Did you go out of house to do that?
So I've seen some really powerful videos done in-house, and I knew that we could potentially do one simply with an iPhone, but I wanted to make sure we really knocked it out of the park. And we found a local firm that had a couple of freelancers on the side, and they did some promo videos for a local broadcast station. And one of the promos they did for a broadcast station featured one of our officers. And so that's how they initially got on my radar. Ended up getting back and forth conversation with them. They understood budget wise it was going to be really tough for us. So we really kind of streamlined as much as possible. We ended up filming over the course of just one day, but there was a lot of planning to maximize that one day. And then really the biggest value that they added that becomes harder when you do it internally is the editing, the refining, and the ultimate delivery of it. And the other part that I think there's a big miss within law enforcement, especially when it relates to videos and recruiting, is the marketing of these videos. Again, just because you did a 3.5 minute video doesn't mean you're done. Like, that's just the start of it. So how are you going to maximize that? How are you going to leverage not just your department accounts, but your city accounts? How are you going to get that into local access television? Like every single potential viewing point from a resident, like how are you going to get in front of them? And so I was so pleased we reached out to our local cable access. And I know that's not necessarily the audience that we're reaching, but you never know that might reach a family member who then encourages our target audience to go into it. And they're looking for content all the time. And so they ended up putting us on a loop for 3 months. It's like, all right, so if a resident hasn't seen it flipping through the channels, then shame on them, because it's there. It is definitely there. So we really just try to open our mind up to reaching as many people as we can and tapping into some unique different channels that perhaps we don't on a regular basis.
Outstanding. Recruitment is such a big issue for everybody, and I'm glad to see that you guys took the aspect of we're gonna revise it. We're gonna attack it from the perspective of what's going on in the world right now today, and showing the things that you're gonna do to be better, to get the right people in the agencies that we have. I think so many agencies are struggling because they just don't know where to go, and you're going to give them some valuable insights into this. So I appreciate you sharing that with us today. What do you see as the greatest challenges in the future for comms people or public information officers in our field?
There's a couple, and for me, on the day-to-day side, it's that constant management and struggle of battling misinformation and disinformation that's out there. The intentionality of misleading audiences. It can start really small with that one account that has 10 followers, but that can balloon quickly. So keeping really a strong handle in terms of everything that's being said about the organization requires a lot, and it requires some thoughtful responses. It requires being tactful in terms of the responses, and not inflating something that may be nothing, but could go somewhere. So that's something I think is definitely a major challenge. And it's somewhat associated with that too, is I really worry about the burnout with our profession in particular. I think, we're trying to do everything really well at all times, and in one person shops in particular, it is a 24/7 job. I get home and I may have to just fire up the laptop again and get going again. And I've been sending some text exchanges, and we've had this ongoing joke with a couple of PIOs nationally about, the funniest places or the oddest places in which you've done a post or a press release. And I've been everywhere. I just this past weekend, I was took my girls to an amusement park, and I'm doing it while I'm waiting for a ride. I've done it I've done it in porta potties because it's quiet, not because I had to go to the bathroom, you know? So it ranges all over the place, but that is not sustainable for 35 years, 30 years. It's just not sustainable. And I worry about myself with burnout, but I worry about others who I know they've poured so much into it, and really how sustainable can that be over a long course of time?
And I think what probably in our field that we have to impart to management and what will happen over time as they realize how much more important it is to have good quality public information officers and comms people is that they need to support them just like they're supporting their officers. So they may have to bring in extra staff to help those people because it is such a big program and it's so important and it has such an impact on the image of the agency. Um, I also think that self care is something that we don't talk about enough
Yeah.
in our field. And one of the uh, people I had on, well, that will actually be on next week, talked about self care, but not from her perspective. She said we need to talk about self care. So I've got some connections for some PIOs that they specialize in self care. So I think we need to think more like that in that aspect of we need to take care of ourselves physically by exercising and de-stressing and trying to uh, disengage when possible. And like you said, you're at an amusement park, you're doing a press release, and I was at a wedding once, and I was in the photo booth doing. I took the photo booth over because it was quiet, and I was able to sit there and type it out on a phone to send it out. So yeah, but you're also taking away from time at home with family when you're sitting on your phone answering a message or a post. And leadership also has to realize when we're on vacation, which doesn't always happen. I've I was in Washington D.C. Um, several years ago with my old agency and with my kids, and we were headed. Well, we were right in front of the Murrah Federal Building, or not the Murrah Federal Building, in the Hoover Building, and I get a phone call from my deputy chief saying, "I need to know what you said to a reporter 3 weeks ago because the story just came out today on that day." I go, "What story are you talking about? What reporter? I'm on vacation. I have no clue what you're talking about." And finally, my wife goes, "Just hang up the phone." And she took the phone and she hung up on it. And that was kind of a relief.
Well, and part
It
of
really
it,
was.
it speaks to us being disciplined ourselves, you know, and that's, I think, a major weakness because in our nature, for the most part, it's to help and to do as much as possible and support the agency as much as possible. But we're not helping ourselves when we're not giving ourselves that breather. And, I think one thing I'm really encouraged about is that the narrative has really shifted to ensure that the officer wellness piece has really been addressed and taken care of. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but that is certainly much more out there than even when I started 7.5 years ago here. But when I think about things like critical incident stress management teams that are going out to scenes, especially, fatal crashes and things like that, I've been pushing and advocating that, thinking about like our crime scene services people that are civilians in our department, they need that consulting as much as the officers do, if not more, because they're the ones documenting these horrendous scenes. Whereas at least some of the officers in some cases can be on and off scene. They don't necessarily have to be there fully invested, fully immersed like a crime scene services technician has to be. And
Right.
and I think the same goes for us. I think I was at a scene where there was a stairwell collapse when it was under construction, and we had two workers that were crushed. And I didn't see anything, but having to be in that vicinity at that time, it weighed heavy on me. It was a good 2 weeks where it was just eating away at me, and I just could not move beyond it. And started to talk to some other PIOs just to kind of provide that release because I was in a bad spot. I was in a really bad spot. And when you're in that type of spot too, you're not going to be putting out quality products, quality messaging. You're gonna hurt yourself. You're gonna hurt the agency. And I needed to get some self care during that time.
Very important to take care of yourself, and I'm glad that you were able to reach out to other PIOs. And I think that's becoming a common theme now, where we're in a time of crisis, or just for, hey, I need some advice. I think that's one thing. This is why one of the reasons why I created the podcast was to provide that resource and connection for people to say, hey, can I talk to you about this? Because I've never seen this before. I'm going through something. I don't know what to do. Can you give me some advice? And I think that's important. And that networking, like we said, having that network of people you can refer to or call up and say, hey, help is important.
No one's going to turn that down. No one at all.
No, nobody I know, nobody I've ever met in this field. And we've all been through it. We've all had our moments. All right, so let's lighten it up a little bit. Some rapid fire questions here. Your favorite go-to drink?
So it depends on the type of timing of the day. So
Okay.
early morning right now, my go-to drink is Pete's coffee. I love Pete's.
Okay.
It's taken over Dunkin' and Starbucks here, which is saying a lot for a Bostonian to say something's better than
Okay.
Dunkin' Donuts. But yes, Pete's coffee in the morning. If it's the weekend, there's so many amazing IPAs up here in the Northeast. If you ever come up to the Northeast, you need to get to Vermont. You need to get to Maine. Their IPAs are the best, even parts of Boston. And the nightcap has to be right now a gin and tonic or ginger ale and Captain Morgan's.
Nice. Nice. All right. So name one person living or dead who you'd like to meet and why.
So to get a little soft and family specific, I never met one of my grandfathers. So I met all but one grandfather, and he died when my mother was 12. So I just would love to be able to pick his brain and just learn a little bit about him. My mother doesn't even have a lot of stories about him because she was so young when he passed away. So if I was going to go family, it would definitely be my grandfather who I never met.
Nice. What is a must-read book in your mind?
So I think for any PR professional, including PIOs, the tipping point in Malcolm Gladwell is a must read. So I've read that book probably 3 or 4 times, and was introduced to it in college, and it is still relevant to today as it is any other point. It was, a lot of the case studies that were written were done in the 40s and 50s, but the application is beyond relevant even to today.
Great. Your favorite food?
I love seafood. Love seafood. Again, Bostonian.
You're in Boston. Yeah, obviously.
So we're planning on hosting the mid-year PIO conference for ISCP next year here in Cambridge. And anyone who comes, I promise you, I will take you to some of the best lobster roll locations, clam strips, chowder places, any of those places you want to find some of the best, you'll get it when you come to the mid-year conference.
I will be there. Trust me, I will be there. What gives you hope, Jeremy?
I look at, so I have 2 daughters. My oldest daughter is 11, and I feel like she is feeling a sense of empowerment that a lot of young women have probably never felt ever before. I may be going on a limb there, obviously not being a woman myself, but I see her and she says with confidence that she is going to be a CEO of a company. She could even be the president. And she does not hesitate saying those things. And to me, that just speaks volumes in terms of where we're heading in the future.
I agree. I think I've seen my daughter. She's 23 now. She's a digital producer for a TV station in Madison, and she does some phenomenal work. And she's very recognized now where she's at, and even all those conglomerates that own all the stations, she was there for maybe a month and she got recognized because all of a sudden they saw their digital numbers skyrocket. And she goes, Dad, I can't believe I got recognized for that. I said, that's because you pour everything into your work and it's recognized. So
That's fantastic.
yeah, young women nowadays, I think that they're definitely feeling much more empowered than they have in the past.
Talk about a good media contact too.
Yes. And the funny thing is, so this goes back that in my family, I had my dad's cousin, great cousin, I guess it would be, was a NBC vice president years ago. I mean, he's since passed, but so to make this story real quick and short, my daughter goes up to Madison, gets her job, her name starts showing up in bylines, and a professor from University of Madison, Wisconsin University of Wisconsin Madison says, "Hey, are you related to Russ Tornabene?" And my daughter sends me a text message. Who's Russ? I go, that's Grandpa's cousin who worked for NBC. She goes, how did I not know this in all these years? So the guy sent her a picture of my dad's cousin and him, and now they have connected because of it.
That's
So
beautiful.
yeah, very cool thing. No. All right. So final thoughts. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I would like to double down though in terms of the mental health piece for PIOs, and just really keeping close tabs on that. Like I said, just going through situations like I did myself, if you're starting to lose sleep, if you're, having a hard time concentrating, if you're more irritable, like looking for those type of signs and reaching out to any one of us, reaching out to, people that you can trust within our department, within your family. I think it's just so, so important. And it's so awesome to see that type of conversation be elevated, especially in the Olympics and the Simone Biles incident and things like that. I think we can't have enough conversation around that. It's so important.
And if you think about where mental health leads to, and not to say a PI was going to do this, but the acts of violence that have come from not taking care of your mental health, it's important for us more and more to speak about this from personal health to anywhere. And like you said, I think that's great that Simone Biles was able to talk about it. And then to see the support that came from other athletes and then other people in the world that were supporting her stepping back from a sport, even though people are calling her a quitter, but she obviously had something going on and needed help, and she got it, and it was able to actually shine a little bit just before the end of her opportunity.
Yeah, it was great to see. It really was.
Jeremy, how can people best reach out to you if they want to learn more or connect with you?
So probably the two best places would be Twitter and LinkedIn. So on Twitter, it's JAY Warnick. I'll make sure you have that account. And then on LinkedIn, it's just my name, Jeremy Warnick. But I'd be happy to connect with anybody. I really do enjoy the networking piece. And my Twitter feed is more just general marketing, PR type stuff. And I don't get into more of the day-to-day police stuff, but I'm always looking for insightful articles and willing to share those and just have any back and forth correspondence with anyone who's looking for support or looking for some sort of, just general correspondence and help through a situation.
Very cool. Jeremy, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you very much. I will add all that stuff that you provided, including the book about Tipping Point and all that into the show notes. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And that was Jeremy Warnick, the communications director for the Cambridge Police Department. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Really appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to contact the show, please email us at thepiopodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified of the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows reviews, please give us a review. We appreciate any review, good or bad. It helps us improve on each episode. Until next time, be safe.